Shiv Viswanathan. Those of you who saw the Asian Age of the Deccan Chronicle probably saw a piece on the Telangana movement and the Commons Conference. Shiv describes himself as a social science nomad based at Ahmedabad. He has been a senior fellow of the Center for Study of Developing Societies, Delhi. An anthropologist and a human rights researcher, he is currently working on the semiotics of the emerging Indian middle class in India and the relation between energy systems and justice. His writings have explored the psychological, cultural, and political relations of science, the growing control of society by technology, and linkages between scientific establishment and authoritarian structures of state.
Patrick Geddes was the first professor of sociology in India, and Geddes once said that if Karl Marx had understood forestry, his theory of communism would have had more of the commons in it. But I think the important point here is, I think it was an attempt to look at how economics as a mode of thought operates. And my first proposition is very simple. The economization of the commons is a threat to democracy. I mean, let's take the classic representation in the seminar, Elinor Ostrom. She began by saying that the people who study the commons are a marginal part of economics. Therefore, we should professionalize such that we create a behavioral science of economics. We make it a game theoretic economics. We make it a professional economics. And then she confused multiplicity and plurality. The availability of different solutions in the same language does not speak the language of the commons. The language of the commons is in dialects. And I think both she and Jairam Ramesh don't seem to understand the difference between language, even the language of professions, which is the language with an army, and the language of dialects. And I think this is the first big problem. The economization of the discipline threatens the commons itself. My second proposition is actually quite simple. In the attempt to confuse information and knowledge, there is no attempt to create a theory of cognitive justice. Let me explain what cognitive justice means. You know, I'm tired of IDS and other groups talking about participation. Participation is muck. Theories of voice don't really add anything. And a group of tribals recently came to me, along with some of the leaders, and said, we want to have a debate where we don't want to have just voice and participation. We want our right to the very forms of knowledge that we have. Because our rights to knowledge is a right to our livelihoods. And she said, you know, you can't, unless you have a debate between the varieties of knowledge, unless you have a debate between science and the varieties of knowledge around science, which science has hegemonized, a theory of commons is not possible. Because there is no idea of the hegemonies of knowledge that science creates. I mean, there's almost a kind of what I call cognitive innocence to the theories of economics. That science itself is a hegemonic form of knowledge. You can't create a common without the kind of knowledge that the commons carries. And you know, this brings me to the next proposition. You know, I'm surprised that everyone is busy talking about the new commons, but the new commons does not talk about the commons of the disaster economy. It does not talk about the commons of obsolescence. Where in this entire conference has anyone talked about the nature of obsolescence? Everyone is wedded to the sacredness of innovation. Hundreds of societies are going obsolescent. Where is the guarantee against obsolescence? Where is the guarantee against displacement and the ironies of development? We have more refugees from development than from all the wars we have fought. You know, I think it's time this, what I call the immaculate innocence of the commons theory is challenged. And I think we have to bring the politics of knowledge back. It's not the politics of profession as Ostrom and Jairam Ramesh are emphasizing. Ramesh is happy, but as he told me confidentially, you know, it doesn't apply to nuclear and it doesn't apply to coal mines. I'm sorry, you can't have a partial commons. You can't take a slice of reality and pretend it is the whole. And I think it's precisely the lack of, you know, the attention to the silences of the commons that no one talks about. Where are those who are not represented in commons theory? Stakeholders are nice, shareholders are nice, But what about all the people who are disappearing? Why a decision is being taken? Who represents the disappeared of Narmada? And this brings me to three separate points. I think the commons idea is insufficient as a theory of the democratization of democracy. Let me put the propositions quickly so I don't have time. One, the commons theory has no notion of time. Someone who read Brundtland's book on sustainability once said, how can she write a theory of sustainability? She doesn't even have 3 words for time. While shifting cultivation probably has 21 varieties of time. Without the right to time in your constitution, you can't save these communities. Unless you're always caught within the forced language of innovation. You're caught within the captive text of obsolescence. You're caught within theories of progress. You're caught within ideas of development and underdevelopment. And this language is basically genocidal. I'm afraid that the language of the commons has no guarantees against it. So let me make 4 quick propositions of what we can do. What I'm suggesting, one, is that let's say a constitutionalization of the commons. Let me give you an example. In India, we have the fundamental rights, and we have a second section of the constitution called the directive principles of state policy. I think the directive principles of state policy should be taken over by commons researchers, asking for future guarantees. Let me give very simple examples. A right to health without a right to the diversity of health fails to guarantee the commons. My friend Ziauddin Sadar put it brilliantly. And he was talking about the National Health Service in England. But he said, I'm an English citizen and a Muslim. And my right to health demands not only a right to the NHS, but a right to my own ideas of healing, dying, and welfare. That is, without the theory of the cognitive cultures which sustain rights, which sustain livelihood, rights as an abstract term can't guarantee you anything. Yeah, I think the third point I want to emphasize is we have to create a notion of the tacit constitution. The formal constitution appropriated by corporate lawyers and technocrats is no use. We have to create a tacit constitution in terms of the cultures of life, livelihood, life cycle, lifestyle of our own people. Their notions of time, their ideas of progress, their ideas of welfare. And it's in this context that I want to make the last point. The first appropriation of any commons is the appropriation of language. In India, we reduced the thousands of languages to 17, meaning only those languages which had a written script were recognized as language, and the thousands of dialects representing years and eons of knowledge were not even treated as knowledge because they were oral history. When you destroy language, when you impoverish the ideas of time, I don't think how you can link democracy and democracy. This is, as I told you, the politics of a wet blanket. But I hope it survives somewhere in your attention to professionalizing. Thank you.